People say life-changing moments arrive quietly, without thunder or warning. For me, it came in the form of a formal letter sealed in red wax, carried in the hands of a bored-looking mailman who didn't know he was delivering the beginning of something strange. At first, I thought it was a mistake or a scam. Nobody sends handwritten envelopes anymore, especially not to someone like me. I was 24, broke, running out of options, and one overdue rent notice away from being thrown out of my apartment. Still, something about the letter unsettled me enough that I opened it instead of throwing it away. 2 days later, I found myself sitting in an old law office, staring at shelves stacked with leather-bound books and framed certificates that had dates older than my grandparents. The air smelled like wood polish and secrets. Across from me sat a man named Mr. Hale, rigid posture, cold expression, and a suit so perfectly pressed it looked unnatural. He introduced himself as the executor of the Whitlock estate and spoke with the confidence of someone who never had to repeat himself. Then he told me the purpose of the meeting. I had been requested specifically and intentionally to marry a woman named Lady Eleanor Whitlock. The absurdity of it made me laugh, but his expression never changed. He simply waited, calm and patient, as though he expected that reaction. When I finally asked what benefit I would get from such an arrangement, he slid a document across the desk. My breath caught at the number printed there. It wasn't just money, it was escape. It was the kind of number that erased your past, your debts, your failures. All I had to do was stay married to her for 1 year. No heirs. No conditions beyond simply being her husband in public and living with her. Mr. Hale emphasized that she was elderly, wealthy, and in need of companionship, nothing more. But something in his tone, one slight hesitation, made the words feel incomplete. I should have walked away. Anyone sane would have. Instead, driven by a mix of desperation and morbid curiosity, I asked the only question that mattered. When do I meet her? The Whitlock estate sat on a lonely cliff outside a coastal town. The iron gates opened slowly, groaning like they hadn't moved in decades. The mansion was enormous, gothic, and intimidating, with tall windows, stone gargoyles, and ivy wrapped so tightly around the structure it looked like the house was being swallowed. Inside, the halls were lined with portraits, stern faces with cold eyes, all sharing the same refined features, a family legacy frozen in paint, watching me as if I were a trespasser rather than a guest. Mr. Hale eventually led me to two towering doors carved with roses and thorns. He knocked once and pushed them open. Inside, surrounded by flickering candlelight and shadows, sat Lady Eleanor Whitlock. She was older, yes, but not fragile. There was elegance in the way she held herself, an aura of control and quiet danger. Her silver hair was pinned neatly, her pale skin flawless, and her eyes, sharp and intelligent, studied me with unsettling precision. She smiled when I entered, not kindly, but knowingly. It felt like walking into a chessboard where she had already planned every move. I sat when she instructed me to, unsure whether I was more nervous or fascinated. When I mentioned I hadn't signed anything yet, her smile deepened as though that answer pleased her. She told me she didn't want a man who agreed too easily. She wanted someone who understood the weight of commitment. When I asked why she chose me, her gaze softened, not with affection, but something stranger. She told me I needed saving and that I had no idea what I was truly worth. Then, when I asked her what she needed, she stepped closer, her voice low and almost intimate, telling me she needed someone who wouldn't run when night fell. Before I could ask what that meant, she invited me to follow her deeper into the mansion. We walked down a silent hallway lined with closed doors, each marked with a number. She stopped at one door 9. Her hand rested on the handle as she warned me softly that crossing this threshold would change my life and that once opened, nothing could return to the way it was. I asked what was inside, but instead of explaining, she simply smiled, a slow, secret smile, and whispered that behind the door was the truth. Then she opened it. The room beyond was dark, and for a second I thought it was empty, until I heard it. Breathing. Slow, steady, impossibly calm. Something or someone was inside, waiting. Every instinct in me screamed to step back, but her voice slid around me like silk, telling me that if I walked away now, I would never know why I had been chosen. My hand trembled, not from fear exactly, but from the strange pull toward the unknown. So I stepped forward, and the door closed behind us. The darkness inside the room wasn't ordinary darkness. It felt dense, almost physical, like a presence pressing against my skin. I stood still, giving my eyes time to adjust, but the shadows clung stubbornly to everything. Behind me, Eleanor didn't move or speak. I could feel her there, calm, patient, watching not with curiosity, but with certainty, as if she already knew exactly how I would react. Slowly, a faint amber glow appeared, revealing the outline of the room. The walls were stone, older than the rest of the house, and the air smelled like cedar, dust, and something faintly floral, something familiar, though I couldn't place it. My heart beat louder than my footsteps as I walked further inside. Then I saw it. Not an object, not a creature, a portrait. But calling it a portrait felt wrong. It was enormous, easily 8 feet tall, framed by dark carved wood and draped with deep red velvet that looked more like a curtain than decoration. The woman in the painting looked young, no older than 25. Her hair was dark, her lips full, her skin pale. Her eyes held intensity, intelligence, and something dangerously close to longing. She didn't just look real. She looked alive. I stared at it, strangely breathless. Something in my chest tightened. Recognition? No. Connection. Like the painting wasn't just capturing a woman, it was holding a memory I should have known. Before I could speak, Eleanor finally broke the silence. She was the first. Her voice was soft, but it echoed in the stone room like a whisper inside a cathedral. I turned toward her slowly. The first what? I asked. She stepped toward the portrait, her fingertips brushing the edge of the velvet frame. The first Whitlock bride, she said, and the one every bride after her has been compared to. There was a strange intimacy in the way she looked at the painting, not admiration, but reverence. Almost devotion. I swallowed. This feels like a shrine. Eleanor gave a small smile, not amused, but approving. You notice things, she murmured. Good. My pulse quickened. Not because of her compliment, but because something deep inside me told me this room wasn't meant for casual visitors. Why bring me here? I asked. Her eyes drifted back to mine, sharp and knowing. Because if you are going to agree to marry me, she said, you deserve to know that this house, this family, does not believe marriage is just a contract. She moved closer, slow and deliberate, and although she didn't touch me, her presence filled the space with something warm, heavy, magnetic. We believe marriage is legacy, she continued. A continuation of a bond older than memory. A role that chooses the person, not the other way around. Role? I repeated quietly. What role? She didn't answer, not directly. Instead, she gestured toward another object I hadn't noticed, a glass display case beside the portrait. Inside it lay an old ring, silver, intricate, handcrafted. The design wound around itself like vines and thorns, elegant and unsettling. At its center was a dark stone that didn't shine like a gem, it absorbed light instead. As I stepped closer, I noticed the strangest detail. The ring wasn't sitting on velvet or in a box. It was warm, gently glowing, almost breathing. What is that? I whispered. The Whitlock marriage seal, she said. Every husband who has worn it has become part of this house's story. Her gaze lingered on me long enough to make the air feel charged. And every man who has refused it, she added softly, has never left these grounds the same. My throat tightened. So I don't have a choice? She tilted her head, not offended, not surprised, just studying me the way someone studies a fragile lie about to break. You always have a choice, she said. But choices carry consequences. That sentence hung in the air between us. She stepped closer again, not touching, but close enough that I could smell the soft perfume on her skin. The same scent from the air earlier. Floral. Lavender. Something deeper beneath it, amber, musk, old wood, unspoken promises. You're afraid, she whispered, not accusing, almost gentle. Yes, I admitted. Good. She smiled faintly. Fear means you understand the weight of what you're stepping into. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating her face in a blue-white glow. For a second, just 1 second, she didn't look elderly. She looked like the woman in the painting. Beautiful, eternal, tragic, and watching me with eyes that felt ancient. "I don't understand," I murmured. "You will," she replied. She lifted her hand, not commanding, but inviting, palm open. "Come." I hesitated, breath shallow, but something in me moved before logic could interfere. My hand lifted toward hers. The moment my fingers brushed her palm, the candles flickered violently, then steadied. Her hand was warm, too warm, like touching fire that didn't burn. Then she leaned in, not kissing me, not touching more, but close enough that her breath caressed my skin and her voice became something intimate and unbreakable. "If you choose to become mine," she whispered, "you must understand something first." My heartbeat thundered. "What?" I asked. Her lips curved, not a smile, something else. "Possession. Marriage in the Whitlock line," she said softly, "is not an arrangement." Her eyes locked with mine, sharp and consuming. "It is a binding." A chill ran down my spine, not from fear, but from understanding something without logic or evidence, something deeply instinctive. This wasn't just fate. It wasn't coincidence. It wasn't random selection. I had been chosen long before the letter arrived, before I knew her name, before I knew this house existed. Eleanor released my hand gently, but her touch lingered in my skin like warmth that wouldn't fade. "You may leave now," she said, stepping back. "Sleep. Think." She turned toward the door and paused, her voice quieter but filled with certainty. "By morning, you will know your answer." She stepped into the hallway, leaving the door open behind her. I remained frozen, staring at the portrait, the ring, the shadows that no longer felt silent. And somewhere, faint but unmistakable, the breathing I heard earlier returned. Slow, steady, patient, waiting. I didn't remember leaving the room or walking back down the hallway. All I knew was that suddenly I was alone in the guest chamber Eleanor had assigned me, though guest never felt like the right word. Everything about the room suggested permanence, expectation. Heavy velvet curtains hung over tall windows. The furniture was antique, carved from dark walnut, polished until the candlelight reflected off its curves. The bed was enormous, California king, and its sheets were cold against my skin even after I sat down. The storm outside hadn't softened. Rain struck the windows in wild bursts, and the wind carried a low, distant hum. The Whitlock estate creaked under the pressure, like a creature shifting in its sleep. I tried to shake the unease building in me, but the memory of Eleanor's words wouldn't loosen their grip. A binding, not a contract, not a performance. Something else. Something older. I reached for the lamp beside the bed, switched it on, and stared at the room, forcing myself to breathe steadily. That was when I noticed the envelope waiting on the nightstand, white, crisp, untouched. My name was written on it by hand. No seal. No signature. Just my name. For a long time, I didn't open it. I simply stared, as if the paper itself might reveal something. Eventually, curiosity, mixed with a strange pull I couldn't explain, won. Inside was a single sheet of paper, thick and textured, like parchment. One sentence, written in elegant ink: "No Whitlock groom has ever slept through his first night." I read it again, and somewhere deep in the house, a door closed soft, deliberate, not caused by the storm. Someone was awake. Someone was moving. The hair on the back of my neck lifted. I wasn't sure if the message was a warning or an invitation. Maybe both. I placed the letter back on the table, slower than necessary, suddenly aware of the silence in the room, a silence too perfect to be natural. I stood, pacing once, twice, before stopping at the mirror across from the bed. The reflection staring back looked the same on the surface, same face, same tired eyes, but something behind them was shifting. Something restless. Something curious. I should have left the estate that night. I should have packed my things, walked out the door, and never looked back. But the truth was undeniable. Leaving wasn't part of me anymore. The house had already taken root in my thoughts. Or maybe Eleanor had. The sound came again, footsteps this time. Slow, soft, controlled. moving down the hallway outside my door. I moved toward the noise, not away. My hand hovered over the doorknob for a moment, hesitating, not out of fear, but anticipation. When I finally opened the door, the hallway stretched long and dim. The only light came from a few wall sconces flickering like candlelit breaths. The air felt warmer out here, thick with perfume, the same scent Eleanor wore. Lavender. Amber. Something ancient beneath. At the far end of the hallway, a figure stood partially in shadow. Tall. Still. Watching. For a moment, my heart stopped. It wasn't Eleanor. At least, not as I had seen her earlier. The figure was younger. Straight-backed. Graceful. With long dark hair cascading over her shoulders. Just like the woman in the portrait. My rational mind clawed for explanation, but instinct whispered something else, recognition so deep it felt inherited rather than learned. The figure turned and began walking, not toward me, but away, moving with elegance, silent steps barely disturbing the shadows. And something in me followed. Not because I chose to, because I needed to. The hallway curved, leading me deeper into the mansion, into places I hadn't yet seen. I passed closed doors, tall archways, and tapestries woven with seams I didn't understand. Every step echoed softly, as though the house acknowledged my movements. Finally, the woman stopped in front of a door I hadn't noticed before. The frame was different, older, carved with the same thorn and vine pattern as the ring in the portrait room. She didn't speak. Instead, she placed her hand on the handle, turned slightly, and looked at me, not urging, not pleading, just waiting. When I reached her, she wasn't a ghost. Not transparent. Not illusion. She was solid, real enough that I could sense warmth radiating from her skin. But her eyes, they held centuries. She opened the door and stepped aside. Inside was a study, smaller than the others, lit by a single golden lamp on a desk. Books filled every wall, and in the corner stood a tall grandfather clock, its pendulum swaying slowly, patiently. On the desk lay something wrapped in black linen. The woman, silent, composed, nodded toward it. My breath tightened as I unwrapped the cloth. Another letter. Another ring. This one smaller, my size, yet identical in design to the one encased in the other room. The dark stone pulsed softly, like a heartbeat waiting for a match. I didn't touch it. Not yet. The woman moved behind me, close enough that I felt warmth on my neck, close, intimate, but not invasive. The room seemed to shrink, as though her presence filled it. Then finally, she spoke. Her voice was soft, melodic, far too familiar. "You already feel it," she whispered. "The house, the history, the choice already made." I swallowed hard. "Who are you?" She leaned closer, not touching, speaking with a calm that felt almost hypnotic. "I am what came before," she murmured. "And what returns when chosen." My pulse thundered. Chosen for what? The pendulum behind us continued its slow, steady rhythm. She smiled, not haunting. Beautiful. I felt her breath against my ear as she whispered, "To continue what you never knew you were part of." I closed my eyes. And the moment I did, a warm hand, not cold, not ghostly, rested on mine. When I opened my eyes again, the woman was gone. But the ring remained. Waiting. Breathing. Alive. For a long time, I didn't move. The ring sat on the desk like something alive watching me, waiting. The house was silent now. Even the storm outside had dimmed to a low distant tremble, as if nature itself was listening. I finally forced myself to step back. That ring wasn't just jewelry. It was an invitation. Or a claim. My thoughts raced, but nothing made sense. Who was the woman I'd seen? A memory? A spirit? A hallucination? She felt real, too real. And the way she spoke, the way she looked at me as if she knew me, as if she expected me, it clung to me like perfume. I needed air. I rubbed the linen back over the ring and turned toward the door, only to hear it. A soft voice. Not loud, not distant. Right behind me. "Leaving already?" I spun around. Eleanor stood in the doorway. And she was no longer in the gown she wore earlier. Her hair was loose now, cascading down her shoulders in soft waves. The silk robe she wore shimmered under the lamplight, dark red, tied loosely at the waist. Her expression wasn't angry. It was curious, measuring, almost proud. I thought you were asleep, I said, though it came out as more of a whisper. She smiled, not wide, not playful, controlled. I told you, she said softly, stepping inside the study. No Whitlock groom sleeps his first night. My pulse pounded. You knew I would find this room. It's not about finding it, she answered, moving closer. It's about being drawn to it. I swallowed. And the woman in the hallway? Something flickered in her eyes. Not surprise, recognition. You saw her, she murmured, almost reverent. Then it has already begun. What has begun? I asked. Instead of answering, she brushed her fingers along the desk, stopping where the ring was wrapped beneath the cloth. She showed you the past. Eleanor continued quietly. Now you have to decide whether you accept the future. I stepped back. None of this makes sense. Why me? Why this? Eleanor lifted her gaze, slow, deliberate, until her eyes met mine. When you came to this house, she said, you believed you were chosen because you had nothing. No family, no history, no path. I didn't speak. She took another slow step closer. But the truth, she whispered, is that you were chosen because you weren't alone. Because you are not the first. Because you carry what the others carried. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. What are you talking about? She reached up, not touching me, just hovering her hand inches from my chest, over my heartbeat. Blood, she whispered. Lineage. A cycle older than this house. Older than this country. My heart thundered. I don't have family, I snapped. I grew up in foster care. Her smile deepened, sad and knowing. Because your family was erased, she said. Hidden. Protected. Just as the others were before you. It's the only way the line survives. The ring on the table pulsed slow and faint. I stared at it. Eleanor followed my gaze. It won't hurt, she murmured. Something in her tone made it sound like a promise. Or a lie. What happens if I put it on? I whispered. She stepped close enough that I could feel warmth radiating from her body, heat and perfume, and something ancient under the surface. Then she said gently, you will no longer just be a visitor in this house. You will belong to it. My breath shook. And if I don't? Her expression didn't change. But the room did. The temperature dropped just slightly. The shadows lengthened. And somewhere deep in the mansion, a door slammed shut. Eleanor's voice was barely audible now. There is no leaving after tonight. I looked at her, really looked, and for the first time since arriving, I understood. She wasn't trying to convince me. She was waiting. A bond had already formed. The choice wasn't whether to put on the ring. The choice was whether to accept it willingly or fight something I had already been marked by. My hand lifted. Slow. Shaking. Drawn. The linen fell away as I reached for the ring. The stone glowed faintly, deep, dark crimson. My fingertips brushed the metal. Pain struck, not sharp, but warm, spreading through my hand and up my arm like fire and ice at once. My knees nearly buckled as the estate itself seemed to breathe, walls groaning, lights flickering. Eleanor watched with something like awe, not hunger, not triumph. Recognition. When I finally slid the ring onto my finger, the house exhaled. The storm stopped. The clock pendulum froze. And Eleanor whispered with a voice that sounded older than centuries. The moment the ring settled onto my finger, something ancient stirred, not in the walls, not somewhere distant, but deep inside me. A heat spread through my veins like liquid fire, and the room shifted as if reality itself bent to acknowledge the change. I gripped the edge of the desk, breath shallow, heart racing, until I realized the heartbeat pulsing in my chest was no longer mine. It was the ring's. Eleanor watched silently, her eyes reflecting candlelight and something older, deeper, reverent. She didn't move to steady me, didn't speak, didn't guide, she simply observed, as if everything happening was expected. The air thickened, heavy with whispers that didn't come from any visible source. They rose from the floorboards, the walls, the shadows, layered voices murmuring words I didn't understand yet somehow recognized. Air, blood, returned. The temperature dropped enough that my breath fogged the space between us, and yet the ring burned hotter and hotter until my knees threatened to give out. Suddenly, memories, not mine, tore through my mind like lightning. A stone hall lit by torches. A circle of hooded figures kneeling. A vow sealed in blood. A name written in ink made from ash. I saw children being taken, families erased, identities hidden, not to protect them from danger, but because they were the danger. When the vision faded, I wasn't gasping. I was trembling. And the terrifying part wasn't the shock, it was how right it felt. Eleanor finally spoke, her voice quiet but steady, confirming the truth I didn't want. The bloodline wasn't lost, only hidden. Before I could respond, the shadows in the room shifted, gathering behind her, forming height, form, and then a face. The woman I had seen in the hallway, the one who felt more dream than reality, stepped forward. This time, she wasn't translucent or flickering. She was solid, real. Her eyes glowed the same deep red as the stone set into the ring, and when she looked at me, something inside me bowed instinctively, mind, body, memory. "You have questions," she said, and her voice echoed, not because it was loud, but because it didn't belong to just one place. "What am I?" I asked, and the question scraped out of me like gravel. She stepped closer without sound, her cold hand lifting to rest against my jaw. "Not what," she corrected gently. "Who? You're the last heir of the Whitlock covenant, the lineage bound to the threshold between the living and the dead." I swallowed hard, pulse unsteady. I pointed weakly toward Eleanor. And her. The woman's expression softened in a way that was not kindness, but history. "She is your guardian, your guide, a bride only if you choose her." For the first time, Eleanor lowered her eyes, not out of fear, but respect. The woman's gaze deepened. "Now you choose. Accept the covenant and command the dead, or remove the ring and join them." The silence that followed was suffocating. The storm outside had stopped. Even the house seemed to stop breathing, waiting. My entire life, every unanswered question, every empty file, every lonely foster home, suddenly made sense. I wasn't abandoned. I wasn't forgotten. I was prepared, chosen long before I ever stepped foot in this mansion. I exhaled slowly, and the decision surfaced with terrifying clarity. I accept. The words didn't echo, they resonated. The candles flared. The clock on the wall began ticking backward. Shadows throughout the room straightened into kneeling figures, silent witnesses awakening from centuries of waiting. The ring ignited with blinding crimson light, and when it dimmed, the world no longer felt the same. The woman, the ancestor, the ruler, the ghost, bowed her head slightly, not with superiority, but acknowledgement. "Rise, Whitlock," she whispered, and the title settled over me like a cloak I had been born to wear. Eleanor stepped beside me, not behind me as a servant, not before me as a leader, beside me as something bound. The house breathed in unison with us, and the figures in the shadows remained bowed, waiting for a command I wasn't yet ready to speak. The woman's lips curved into a faint, satisfied smile. "Your reign begins now." And in that moment, I finally understood. I wasn't trapped. I wasn't owned. I had inherited power, terrible, ancient, irresistible power. And the world outside these walls would never be the same again.